Good evening. Boy, it's great to see people. So, hi, I'm Steve Weberg. I'm with the public affairs staff of the Kansas City Public Library, and I want to thank you sincerely for joining us tonight. It's great to be speaking to you here from the Truman Forum Auditorium at our Plaza branch, one of our two primary venues for our award-winning speaking events. We've spent the last 2 years, as many of you no doubt know, engaging you virtually, online. And finally, with the COVID-19 pandemic ebbing, we returned to our auditoriums last week. We're continuing to live stream many of our programs, and we're doing that tonight. And I also want to welcome those of you who are watching us from home right now. It's great to have you here with us too. But there's nothing like the dynamic of this kind of civic discourse face to face. We also couldn't be happier to have the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College joining us. Many, if not most, if not all of you know how much the college means to the library and to our signature speaking series. A little more than 14 years ago, in January 2008, the library was just ramping up what would become this speaking series, and we reached out to the Command and General Staff College to partner on a panel discussion on what was then the 40th anniversary of the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. The college, if you don't know, is where the Army's top young officers go through graduate school. Its alumni range from guys like MacArthur and Eisenhower and Patton to Schwarzkopf and Colin Powell. And the faculty features some of the country's most distinguished military historians. And it's been a bedrock of our programming, one of our best and most popular partners ever since that discussion of TED. I'd like to take just a second right now to recognize the man who really is instrumental in helping us organize these events through the Command and General Staff College. We work closely with him, Lieutenant General Christopher Johnson. Chris, can you stand up real quickly? Who's a team leader in the Department of Military History. It was Chris. It was Chris who came to us with the idea for this series that we're resuming here tonight, Hollywood versus History. It spotlights a succession of military movies, and tonight it's going to be Waterloo, looking at their historical accuracy. Did the filmmakers, in this case including Dino De Laurentiis, get the facts of the story, the facts of the period right? We launched Hollywood versus History actually in late January with The Man Who Would Be King. It was live streamed, not in person then, and we'd hoped to resume the series in person in February. But of course the pandemic was the pandemic, and it surged back. But tonight we are full go. And we're in especially good company with our presenter, Mark Gerges, for a discussion revolving around Napoleon and the events leading up to the Battle of Waterloo. Mark is the Deputy Director of the Department of Military History at the Command and General Staff College. He served 20 years in armor units in Europe, the Balkans, the Middle East, and here in the United States, and retired from active duty in the Army as a lieutenant colonel. He holds a doctorate in history from Florida State University, and while working toward that, and this is the part about why we're in such good hands, he attended the Institute on Napoleon and the French Revolution, the only graduate program in the United States that devoted solely to the historical study of the Revolutionary and Napoleonic era. Now, Waterloo was released in 1970, and interestingly, very interestingly now, it was shot in Ukraine, directed by a Ukrainian, and used some 16,000 Russian Red Army soldiers as extras, giving the film the epic scale, something that you could only do with CGI today. Mark can tell us what they got right and where perhaps they took a little artistic license. On behalf of the library, I also want to extend our gratitude tonight to the late Jerry Rosenblum, in whose memory we're presenting this program and this series. Mr. Rosenblum was a longtime friend of the library and a committed attendee of our signature events and public programs, and he very generously included the library in his estate plan, making the Hollywood versus History series, among other things, possible. Now, for those of you who are here with us virtually tonight, if you've got a question for Mark over the course of his discussion, you can submit it via the YouTube chat box, live chat box, and we'll get as many of those answered at the end of the presentation as we can. Now, those of you here in the auditorium, if you have a question, we'll set up microphones here at the front, as we always have, and you can come and ask your questions there. Again, it's just great to have you with us. It's great to have the Army Command and General Staff College with us. It's great to have all of you with us here virtually. And Mark, it's great to have you with us. This is, I think, the fourth time that you've spoken at the library, going back to 2011. Welcome back. Mark Gerges.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. I just want to say, from the Department of Military History standpoint, as Steve pointed out, it's been 14 years that we've been doing this, and you don't realize how much fun this is for us. We teach a broad-based history curriculum, and we only have a very, very short time period in our own fields. My own is Napoleonic and French Revolution. We teach 2 lessons, and it goes very quickly, and then I'm into some 19th or 20th century topic. And so the opportunity to delve a little bit deeper into something I'm passionate about, and any of us are passionate about, is something that we really appreciate, and we thank all the support for you coming out here and doing this tonight. And there's something about Waterloo. If you go down, if we went to the Country Club Plaza and walked down and grabbed people off the street, I would say almost every single person knows the Battle of Waterloo. They may not know all the particulars, but they would know the battle. They may know the ABBA song. They know something about the battle. It's this cultural touchstone, if you will. And part of it has to do with this idea, it ends the Napoleonic Wars, right? There's a definitive stop to it. It also has the 2 greatest military geniuses of the time going off head to head. You have Napoleon, this great strategist, against Wellington, this great tactician, on an afternoon, and at the end of it, you have a clear ending. And so this epic type of battle that ends an era, creates a century of peace for Europe, really plays a lot into the knowledge base, or why this battle is so well known. And it's only fitting then that there's an epic movie, a truly epic movie about this. And what you've been watching in this unending loop here is actually part of the trailer for the movie. And so let's talk a little bit about this. Series is Hollywood versus History. We're going to talk about the movie itself. We're going to talk about the historical accuracy. We're going to talk about the battle and the campaign. But I have to admit, we've kind of brought you here under false pretenses. Because Dino De Laurentiis, the great Italian producer at this time, is the producer of the movie. Those are 2 Oscars in his hand. They are not for this movie. It was robbed, but it is not for this movie. But Dino De Laurentiis in his career will do about 150 movies, which 80-some of those will have been nominated for Academy Awards. So he's a very, very successful producer. Movies, he gets started really in the sword and sandal era with movies like Barabbas with Anthony Quinn, The Bible with John Huston. He will then do this movie. He does Serpico. He does a wide range of movies all throughout the 1960s, 70s, up until the 80s. So it really shouldn't be Hollywood versus history. His production studio is outside of Rome. Dino Citas, they nicknamed it, so it probably should be Rome versus history. But wait, there's more. He only puts up 40% of the production costs for the movie. The movie itself cost anywhere between $25 to $28 million in 1970. Makes it probably the second most expensive movie. The number one most expensive movie at the time was Cleopatra for $30 million. So this is probably number two. But the director that's brought in and the other financing, the other 60% of the financing is Mosfilm from Moscow. And they bring in the great Sergei Bondarchuk. He was the youngest people's artist in the Soviet Union, a hero of Soviet labor. He's born in Ukraine. He's Ukrainian, baptized just outside the city of Kherson. And he's going to go in there. He doesn't speak much English. Christopher Plummer in his memoir says that Bondarchuk only really speaks 3 phrases of English. One of them is, how are you? The second one is, I come back soon. And the third one is, bonjour. So the movie probably should be Moscow and Rome versus history. But Bondarchuk, the reason why he's brought into this series is he had done a movie in the 1960s, another epic, 7 hours long, War and Peace. It's released in Russia in 4 different installments with just massive amounts of extras and money and time. I mentioned the $25 to $28 million. Because it's going to be filmed in the Soviet Union, it would have cost probably 3 times as much if they had made it in the West or in Hollywood. And then the third person that you may have heard of is actually the composer of the movie, Nino Rota, who does the score, integrates in a lot of the music of the era, but he'll be better known probably in 2 years when The Godfather comes out, and he has done the Godfather soundtrack. So let's talk a little bit about the accuracy of the train. If you ever saw the Sharp series, a BBC miniseries filmed between 1996 and 2006, it's filmed in Ukraine, in Crimea, and stars Sean Bean. And it's kind of interesting because they film it in Ukraine and they film it in Great Britain, a couple of scenes in Portugal and Spain. But the backgrounds of many of the things are much too green for Portugal and Spain, too lush altogether. And they also do a lot of tricks with the camera. For example, they might have scenes with British soldiers marching. And so they have a group of 30 British soldiers, and they march out of the screen, across in front of the camera, go around behind a building and come back around, and they march back against it. And they keep doing this. So as you're watching the scene with Sean Bean and the other actors in front, the same group of infantry keep marching along to kind of give you the sense and the scale. I'll just give you a hint up front. They don't do that here in the movie Waterloo. The attempts for visual accuracy in this movie is incredible. That particular panoramic picture is taken from the Butte de Lyon, this huge mound that was built on the Waterloo battlefield in the 1820s. And it shows you how relatively flat, with just 2 gentle ridges that'll dominate the terrain. The 1970 movie Waterloo is filmed in western Ukraine in Rizhmonds. I messed up that. We'll just say western Ukraine. Anyway, it's near the Carpathian Mountains, near Czechoslovakia, at the time Czechoslovakia. And you can just see these visual mountains in the background. It's also an interesting time for Western Ukraine because the year previously, the Soviet Union had gone into Czechoslovakia with the Warsaw Pact, 250,000 soldiers, and crushed a fledgling democracy, or democratic movement in Prague and put them down. So there's a lot of tension for this Western crew who's going to be working in Western Ukraine as they film this movie. Main characters. The first one, Emperor Napoleon, is Rod Steiger. And Steiger, he was served in the Navy during World War II. He becomes what he says an avowed pacifist. And he's going to say, I don't like Napoleon, but I admire him. And Steiger for this movie, Steiger himself is 45 years old, and the actual Napoleon is 46. So very, very close in age. And the way Steiger presents Napoleon, both him and Bondarchuk try to take away a lot of the mythology. You don't see any of the pose in there. A lot of the times Napoleon's standing with his hands behind him. And they try to make him a person. He had one scene is wearing glasses. He's often very sweaty, out of breath. There's a scene with him in a bathtub, a scene with him in robes. And so they try to make him a normal person. Steiger tries to place him as a person who understands he is past his prime, that he knows he's kind of on borrowed time, that his greatness is beyond him, and it's only a matter of time until he loses. The other main character, of course, the Duke of Wellington, is played by Christopher Plummer, at that time best known for Captain Van Trapp and The Sound of Music. Plummer has to compete against Steiger. Steiger had won the Academy Award 2 years before for playing the sheriff in The Heat of the Night. And what Christopher Plummer is going to say, see some of the outreels, they don't actually film their pieces at the same time. And when Plummer sees what Steiger has done, he says, it's the biggest bloody performance I've ever seen. He rips down curtains. He chews up the carpets. He bellows. He screams. He cries. And to top it all, apparently, Napoleon's got the most frightful indigestion, or the worst case of the piles the world has ever seen. I can't compare to that. And so what Plummer does is he doesn't try to compare to that. He actually, there's a military advisor, a man named Will Gray, he's a colonel, had been in the 11th Armored Division during World War II, a British reconnaissance. And Will Gray is going to go through Wellington's correspondence and get all the really good caustic remarks. So constantly in the movie, you're going to see Christopher Plummer saying lines that Wellington said. They're out of context many times, but they're actually the lines that he would say. Some of the other major characters, the great Jack Hawkins, British character actor, is going to play Sir Thomas Picton, commanding at this time the 5th Division as part of the reserve. Picton himself has arrived late to the battlefield. His luggage has not shown up yet, so he will fight the battle in civilian clothes, including a top hat. Jack Hawkins has had larynx cancer, has had his larynx removed, so he can't speak, and so all his lines are going to be dubbed, and has a very hard time with the dust and all the pyrotechnics on the battlefield. Playing Marshal Ney is Irish-American actor Dan O'Leary, 51 years old. The actual Marshal Ney at this time is 45-year-old, but he has the look and does a very, very good job, in my opinion, of really replicating the fiery temper warrior, but not necessarily a deep thinker of Marshal Ney. And then Marshal Blucher, the Prussian general, is played by Sergei Bondarchuk. Zacharitsa is a Georgian actor, and he is very, very famous in the Soviet Union. They think the equivalent that the production crew can come up with is he's the Laurence Olivier of the Soviet Union. Very, very famous, well known in the Soviet Union, not at all known in the West. And it's only when he shows up on the set that the bleak lifestyle of this little town that the production crew is on that really livens up when his Georgian crew gets there with their Georgian lines and much, much better foodstuffs. And this last character I just want to mention, Gordon, he's a composite character. There is no particular Gordon. There's a couple of Gordons on the battlefield, but none that play the role here. It's a Rupert Davies, who's a Welsh actor playing a Scotsman. Probably one of the more interesting things with him is his skill set is Rupert Davies has been a Royal Air Force pilot in World War II, shot down in 1940 over the English Channel, and captured by the Germans. He's sent to Luftstalag 3, and he will escape 3 times from Luftstalag 3 and be recaptured and put back in. If you say Luftstalag 3 sounds familiar, that's because the movie The Great Escape is about the escape from Luftstalag 3. He was not one of the 72 prisoners who tries to escape, but his prisoner of war field, he actually creates a little toaster oven that they can use in their hotel rooms because of the horrible, horrible food there. So let's talk a little bit about the extras in the movie, and this is where the movie really shines. 15,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. The 15,000 infantry are Soviet infantry of the 128th Motorized Rifle Division. They're going to come there and they are going to have a camp a couple of miles away from the actual field. The actual set for the movie, they're going to film all the interior scenes in Rome, but the exterior scenes in the battle are going to be on this battlefield that they create in Ukraine. It's going to be 1/2 to 1/3, 2/3 scale, about 2 miles by 1 mile. The actual battlefield's about 3 miles by 1 mile deep. And to create the battlefield, they're going to level 2 mountains, create a valley between it. They're going to lay 5 miles worth of road. If you know anything about the battle, it's very, very muddy. It rains the night before, so they put down 6 miles of irrigation pipes so they can flood the fields. To make sure everything is accurate, they put in 4 different sets of buildings, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a few minutes in the scenes. They also are going to plant 5,000 trees throughout the field, and they do this all a year ahead of time because the farmers of the collective farm then raise barley and rye and wheat and wildflowers based on what the actual battlefield had, and will manage that for a year so that the production comes back in the summer of 1969. It's accurate to what's actually growing there at the time. They also are going to they're going to have 4 Soviet military historians. These are general officers, and then they have Will Gray, the British. And they're going to use a lot of the 19th century paintings to replicate the scenes and what it's supposed to look like. And then you can see the Scots Greys. Up on top of each one is the movie clip, and then you can see the painting. Lady Butler in the lower right, her husband commanded the Scots Greys in the 1880s, and she actually convinced her husband to have the regiment charge at her and her easel so she can get some drawings and paint the accuracy of what it would look like when they're charging. So let's talk a little bit about the history. Napoleon's going to abdicate in April of 1814. The Allies, the Sixth Coalition, are advancing on Paris, and Napoleon is going to abdicate and going to be sent to the island of Elba. The scene, Napoleon's Farewell to the Guard, is actually shot in Italy, but it is relatively accurate for catching the I want to say the timbre of the moment.
Soldiers of my old guard, after 20 years, I have come to say goodbye. France has fallen, so remember me. Though I love you all, I cannot embrace you all. With this kiss, remember me. Goodbye, my soldiers. Goodbye, my sons. Goodbye, my children.
There's not a dry eye in the house right now. Okay, so he's going to say farewell to the Guard. He is going to go to the little Mediterranean island of Elba. He's given 1,000 soldiers and 3 ships and sets to work reorganizing Elba and putting all his energy to it. At this same time, the Bourbons have come back Louis XVIII, younger brother of Louis XVI, who had been beheaded at the start of the Revolution. And this is where they have a cameo by the great Orson Welles. He is only there for really 2 days of filming. He's 55, playing a 60-year-old sovereign. But Louis XVIII is an interesting person. The Duke of Wellington is going to be ambassador to France for a time period before going to the Congress of Vienna. And what he's going to say is that the king was a perfect walking sore. Not a part of his body was sound. Even his head had let out some sort of humor. He had gout, he could barely walk, he could barely breathe. And Wellington also is going to say that he was selfish and false to the highest degree. One of the great stories I like about Louis XVIII, he's in exile in England at this, after 1808. And one spring morning, he's sitting there with his family and his closest advisors. The servant comes with a huge silver platter of strawberries and fresh cream for breakfast. And they serve Louis XVIII first, and he just grabs the entire platter and dumps it on his own plate and hands him back the empty platter and just starts eating, where everyone else at the table is just sitting there looking at him. But he is going to do, Louis XVIII, in his time that he's going to be back, is pretty much do just about everything he can to tick off the veterans of the Grand Armée and really kind of get France upset. At the same time, the Congress of Vienna is going on, where all the great powers are trying to put back together Europe after the turmoil of the Napoleonic Wars. And the allies there are looking like they're going to go back to war over what was the Duchy of Warsaw, Poland. And this is the opportunity that Wellington's going to see to be able to, Napoleon's going to see to actually come back. And just a scene of Orson Welles very carefully and gingerly making his way to his farewell.
Perhaps the people.
Okay, so Napoleon will sing this on the 26th of February. He will leave Elba on his 3 ships. They've painted them to look like British ships. They're going to pass by some British ships that are supposed to be watching him. He lands in southern France, and he begins the march forward with his 1,000 soldiers. And this is really that part of that epic making of the Napoleonic myth. The soldiers he has with him have no rounds in their weapons. They don't want Napoleon does not want bloodshed, and so they march forward with their weapons unloaded. And one of the first units is going to be the 5th line. They're going to come up against the scene itself in the movie has Marshal Ney there. He was not there. If you know the story, Marshal Ney tells Louis XVIII, I'm going to bring him back in an iron cage, and then defects and comes over to Napoleon's side. But here is Napoleon with the 5th line.
Soldiers of the 5th, you recognize me. If you want to kill your emperor, here I am.
Fire! Vive l'empereur!
So 3 weeks after landing in France, he marches back into Paris, and he is again the emperor, and he's going to go about reestablishing a government, trying to get the other the forces, the other allies, to accept his rule, which of course is not going to happen. And the situation by the 1st of June is the Allied armies are starting to coalesce around France. They are drastically trying to rebuild armies. The army he's going to build, the Army of the North, that will go into Belgium is actually a pretty good army. They have a lot of veterans who have come back to the colors. Many of them are actually prisoners of war who had been stuck on British prison hulks. The British had taken some of their old warships that were no longer serviceable, took off the masts, took off the guns, anchored them in bays, and then packed them full of 800 or 900 French prisoners. So the treatment, the conditions were horrible. And so when the war comes back, there's a lot of men who come back to the colors looking for revenge. And so Napoleon's going to be looking at this coalition, and he wants to go and act against somebody quickly. And when we talk about the Waterloo campaign, we're really talking a 4-day time period. From crossing the Sambre River on the 15th of June, 16th of June, there's 2 battles fought, one an advance guard against Wellington at Quatre Bras, and then against the Prussian army at Ligny. The 17th of June, both armies are marching. The night of the 17th of June is when they have the huge torrential downpours. Then the 18th is actually the Battle of Waterloo. And we talk about this, again, the movie does these little things really, really well. It helps when you have 15,000 extras, 2,000 cavalry. I should have also mentioned they have 5,000 of these plastic silhouettes, man's full size. They mount 8 of them on a bar, and at the end they have 2 soldiers in uniform who carry these things. So basically, they carry 1 end on each end, and they have 8 in between them, so it looks like 10 soldiers marching forward. And they've got 5,000 of those that they also move around to help create more people. Bondarchuk, when he is filming this, they think has about the 9th largest army in the world under his control. And that does not include the pipes and drums of the 92nd Gordon Highlanders who come to Italy to film some scenes. They're forbidden by their regiment to go to the Soviet Union for obvious reasons, but there's 50 of them who also take place, who are actually active duty British soldiers who were serving at that time in Minden, West Germany. So here's crossing the Sambre River.
Cross the river. Tomorrow we'll dry our boots in Brussels.
God willing, sire.
God's got nothing to do with it.
You can only do this when you already have trained Soviet soldiers. It would have taken months to get extras to do this. But here's the part of the scene that I like. The wagons and the artillery are crossing on the roads and the bridges. The cavalry and the Poor infantry are fording the river. It's one of those little things that they just get right. Infantry and cavalry would not have used the roads. Those would have been used by the supply columns and the artillery. So one of the most famous aspects of the entire campaign is the Duchess Richmonds ball, held on the night of the 15th of June. It's held in Brussels. The Duke of Wellington is familiar with the Duchess and Duke of Richmond. Richmond had actually been the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland when Arthur Wellesley was a young officer, and he had served under him. And then later on now, Wellesley has risen up to be a field marshal and a duke, and the Duke of Richmond is commanding the reserve back in Brussels. This is how the artists have portrayed the Duchess of Richmond's ball. It's really one of those interristic type of things where it's this last, elegant type of thing before the butchery of the battlefield. And this is one of the big problems that the movie has. Obviously, for artistic license, they compress the time. In the movie, it looks like this happens the night before the battle. This really happens 4 nights before, on the 15th of June. Wellington arrives with his staff at about 11 o'clock at night. He's just going in to eat dinner at 1 a.m. when he's handed a dispatch from a writer. He doesn't look at it, he just puts it in his pocket. They eat dinner. About 3 a.m., he actually opens up the letter, and that's where he's told that the French have crossed the Sambre River, and he offers all the officers to their units and starts to move out the advance guard down towards Quatre Bras. So this is how the artists in the 1870s portrayed the Duchess of Richmonds ball. That's where it actually took place, in a carriage house. It's the only large enough building in Brussels, a carriage house next to where the Richmonds are staying at the time. So a lot different than the scene that's actually portrayed. And then, of course, this is part of this movie.
Really are the best of my generals.
We ladies just have to follow the drum. This season, soldiers are the fashion.
Where would society be without my boys?
They're the salt of England, Arthur.
Scum. Nothing but beggars and scoundrels. All of them. Gin is the spirit of their patriotism.
Yet you expect them to die for you?
Mm-hmm.
Out of duty?
Mm-hmm.
I doubt if even Bonaparte could draw men to him by duty.
Oh, Boney's not a gentleman.
Arthur, what an Englishman you are.
On a field of battle, his hat is worth 50,000 men. But he's not a gentleman.
So there's so many problems with this particular scene. And I didn't put a lot of them in there just because, interesting, they have 4,000 candles lit to film this, which isn't enough light. They don't have the low light cameras that someone like Stanley Kubrick will use later with Barry Lyndon, and so they actually have these back hidden lights that are filming up. It's also mirrored room, and so all the cameramen and the cameras are dressed in British uniforms, so that if you happen to catch a glimpse of them in the mirror. The Duchess of Richmond, played by Virginia McKinnon, one person, observer, talks about her and says, she was one of the most sourest, most ill-tempered personages I have ever come across in my life, haughty and disagreeable. So a little bit different than how it's portrayed in this particular piece. And we can go on with some of the other problems of it. There's timeline issues, the daughter that's in there. But this happens. Wellington gets the message. They've crossed the Sambre River and will start to move forward to fight Quatre Bras and the Prussians. And what Napoleon is trying to do is get the central position. He wants to get between the two armies, defeat them so both of them will move back on their own lines of communication, separate them, and then defeat them piecemeal. He's going to come up to really much a standstill at Quatre Bras, the advance guard under Ney. Will beat the Prussians at Ligny, and the Prussians begin to fall back, but they don't fall back towards the Rhine. They actually fall back towards staying parallel to Wellington, which is one of the key aspects of the campaign. There you can see Ney's forces up at Quatre Bras, and you should see Blücher. The logical thing would be to move this way. Instead, he moves to the north. He's promised Wellington he's going to stay supporting him. And Gneisenau, his chief of staff, disagrees. However, he's loyal to his commander. Blücher himself at this time period, he's 72 years old. There's only 3 general officers after the defeat of Prussia in 1806 who were retained on active duty, and he's one of the 3. But he's 76 years old. His mental capacity may be slightly going. At one point of the campaign, he says he's pregnant with an elephant, and the worst part is it was from a French grenadier. We can unwrap that all kinds of different ways. I don't know how you can do it. But he's going to continue to move towards Wavre and in the north and stay along Wellington's flank. Now, the battle's going to take place in Mont Saint-Jean. It's actually the town just behind the line. And the key aspect is really 2 big ridges. I say ridge, they're not big, really. It's general farming fields, but there are a ridge, the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean, where Wellington and his forces will be. And there's another slightly lower ridge where the French are going to be. The main Brussels road going this way, La Belle Alliance, which is a carriage stop And there's some controversy about the position. Wellington says, I picked this position years before. There's actually articles talking about, I think Winston Churchill did, where his relative Marlborough had picked the same ridge line to fight a battle a century before. The only problem is Wellington probably picked this ridge because there's some good evidence that his quartermaster general looked at this ridge, said it wasn't big enough, and he's the one who actually told him to go back there. But there's 3 farmhouses, these masonry farmhouses, that makes these this position so good. In the center, La Haye Saint is it looks like a fortified compound, really. A farmhouse right alongside the road, central courtyard, very, very easy to defend. Hougoumont, the Chateau de Hougoumont on the Wellington's right flank to the west. And the last one that he's going to do is Papillon over onto the eastern flank. So these 3 outposts, what they prevent the French from doing is advancing directly at Wellington's line, because if you advance straight up it while these are still occupied, they're going to be able to fire in your advance. So these 3 anchor his defense, and you really have to do something with them before you can advance over the line. So the critical events, and we'll talk quickly about them. I did put a picture in here of Siborne's model, Captain William Siborne, who creates a model in the 1830s. If we want to talk a little bit about how he does it, the methodology and stuff, it's a fantastic visualization and how he actually puts the history together to come up with this timeline. But by 10 a.m. That morning, the 2 armies are there. They've spent the night getting drenched, trying to dry out that morning, and Napoleon has ordered them by 9 o'clock to be ready to advance. But the ground is much, much too wet. All the mud has meant that you can't move the artillery around quickly, and so Napoleon is forced to wait until about 11 o'clock in the morning to start the battle. And the artillery will fire, you'll see between 11:25, 11:35. There is some, it's very hard in the time period where you don't have a synchronized watch to be able to tell exactly when something starts. But the fighting is going to start with Napoleon sending forces up against Hougoumont. One of the divisions is led by his brother Jerome. And this is just meant as a diversion. This is not meant to be a major battle. This is meant to have enough pressure to pull troops from Wellington's center to defend this and then create a weakness that he can then punch through. Unfortunately for the French, it doesn't work that way. It almost works exactly the opposite. The French will continue to put more and more forces against Hougoumont and continue to bleed against those defenses. Oops. When you look at this, and one of the things I should have mentioned, the house at Hougoumont is held by some of the guards, the Coldstreams guards, also by Hanoverian troops and some of the King's German Legion. These are all part of this Anglo-Dutch army that Wellington's commanding. And Wellington's not really happy with his army. The Horse Guards is the equivalent headquarters, kind of like the Pentagon of the British Army at the time. And he says, to tell you the truth, I'm not very well pleased either with the manner in which the Horse Guards have conducted themselves toward me. It must be admitted that the army is not a very good one, and being composed as it is, it might be expected that I had the generals and staff formed by me in the last war would have been allowed to come to me again. Instead of that, I'm overloaded with people I've never seen before, and it appears to be purposely intended to keep those out of my way whom I wish to have. However, I do the best I can with the instruments which I have been sent to assist me. And Wellington's army at Waterloo is about 77,000 soldiers altogether. Only about 36 of them are British. 36% are British. There's Hanoverians, there's Brunswickians, there's King's German Legion, there's Netherlands, the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. And so of his British army, and part of the problem with the movie is there's red versus blue. The entire British army under Wellington is in red, when realistically only about 36% of them would have been in red. There's more people in Wellington's army that speak German than speak English. There's 46% of his army speaking German. And so he's not happy. What has happened in April of 1814, after the Peninsular War, his army has been sent to America. His infantry regiments, and they're the ones who are down the Chesapeake, burning the White House and running up and down the Chesapeake. And so he's left with all these other units that he has not worked with before, and a lot of general officers and staff that he's never worked with before. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Great Battery has been firing on the left flank of Wellington's line, and I should have, let me just quickly to orient you. And as we look at this center road separates the battlefield, okay? So this is Wellington's right flank, this is left. We're going to use east and west. What Napoleon wants to do is draw forces this way to the west to be able to punch through over on the east. So by 1 o'clock, his Grand Battery, about 250 artillery pieces, about 100 more guns than Wellington has been pounding the line, and he's going to order Durland's Corps to go forward in the attack. And this is actually a 4-division attack with the horse artillery is going to go with them, as well as cavalry. So it's a very well done combined arms attack. And I'll just show you a little bit of the advance. So you had this open order here, skirmishers going forward, and then you had these mass battalions, these four divisions moving forward. They're going to get to the top of the ridge. One of the Dutch brigades up there, the Netherlands brigades, is going to break. 4 of the 5 battalions will flee. And Wellington has to order the 5th Division with Picton forward that will come and stop the French attack, hold it there. And at that point, Lord Uxbridge, the cavalry commander, will decide that it's time to commence the cavalry. And there's 2 brigades. One's the Household Brigade that's going to take part in this charge, the regiments that are normally guarding the king. And then there's the Union Brigade, made up of a regiment that's British, one of Scots, and one of Irish. And they're going to conduct a charge. Oops, excuse me. William Ponsonby leading the charge. In the movie, it says his father was killed by the French. His father was a banker. He died in 1806 in London. Had nothing to do with the French. This is showing the Scots Greys, the 2nd Dragoons, which are known as the Scots Greys. Notice they're all in gray horses. They've used the Moscow Mounted Police with their great Arabians to replicate the Scots Greys. It's one of those great scenes of a cavalry charge, not at all like it happened. When they actually commit the cavalry, the French have just crested the ridge, so it's a very short little charge. They don't get up to much speed. And only one portion of the Scots Greys will continue to charge all the way down, get to the French guns. They lose control, and then the French will counterattack with a well-timed counterattack with lancers and beat them back. The Union Brigade, by the end of the day, has lost about 49% of its strength. And some of its regiments only has about 63 soldiers at the end of the day who are still able to fight. So by 4 in the afternoon, the artillery has been continuing to pound the Allied line, and Ney at this point thinks he sees what looks like Wellington retreating. It's some repositioning to get people out of the fire. And what will end up happening is one of these great charges in history. About 8,000 cavalry will charge up this hill over the top of the rise And so here's the start of this charge. That one thing the movie does, uh-oh, did I do something? Yeah, move that thing. One of the things the movie starts, this charge starting way too early. They would have gone to a trot, then a canter, and then a charge only the last couple of yards. That's Marshal Ney. He's going to lose 5 horses during this battle. Not wounded, but have 5 horses shot out from under him. When they're filming these scenes, they have 5 different cameras. One on the ground level, one in, or 2 of them in towers. They have another one in a helicopter, and then they have a railroad that's going alongside the horses. And this is, Victor Hugo and Les Miserables will talk about this sunken road, which Bondarchuk seems to think is a ditch or a quarry or something. There's some problems with the sunken road. Because of the making of the Lion's Mound, it's changed the topography around the battlefield. There isn't a sunken road that he wrote about in there, but it wasn't like that. And I should mention also, this was made in the Soviet Union where human life was cheap and animal life was even cheaper. And so there's lots of horses hurt in this production. It's probably one of the biggest black marks against this movie. But probably what I think is the greatest scene of this movie is when the cavalry actually crests the hill and gets to the British squares. So you have 2,000 cavalry charging. In real life, there was something like 27 squares of British infantry. This is the typical tactic of the day to defeat cavalry. As long as you don't run and you don't break, the cavalry can't do anything against you. But the actual scene and those horses, even though they weren't going to charge into the squares, was so frightening that some of the Soviet soldiers break in the square and start to run for it. And there's one soldier who'll be run over and killed during these scenes. Now, the controversy, of course, in the movie makes it sound like that Ney has done this without any oversight from Napoleon. This attack takes place over about a 2-hour period. There will be multiple charges, about 13 different charges. The cavalry can't do anything as long as the soldiers stay in their squares. There's 4 ranks deep. The first 2 ranks are kneeling with their weapons pointed forward with the bayonet. The horses won't charge that what looks like a wall of steel. And then the back 2 ranks are firing, passing. They're firing and passing the weapon back and continuing to maintain fire. And one of the things they're going to be constantly trying to get them to charge in right after the infantry has fired their rounds. So you get this kind of useless piece where cavalry's sitting there just outside of the range of the infantry bayonets, trying to get a charge up. And after 2 hours, it finally is going to fail. So what's going on else in the battlefield? Plancenoit, which is back here, I had mentioned about and showed where the French line was here. Here's La Belle Alliance, the carriage stop. Plancenoit is here. And what is happening is the Prussian forces that are marching up, that are supposed to be chased by Grouchy and kept away from the battlefield, are starting to arrive at the battlefield. Napoleon's going to know Prussians are starting to show up as early as 1 o'clock. They capture a Prussian Hussar. He's going to be interrogated. They know the Prussians are coming. But by 4 o'clock, the pressure is starting to build. Napoleon starts the day with 36 battalions in reserve. So these are 36 battalions, a corps, 6th Corps, and then the Imperial Guard that are meant to be able to influence the battle. And as the Prussians start to come in, he has to feed more and more of them over to the east of Plancenoit to keep them at bay. By about 6 o'clock, you can start to see Lobau's Corps, which is there, and battalions of the Young Guard are starting to get into Plancenoit, holding that line in there. But at 7:30, Napoleon thinks the conditions are right. They have pounded the British throughout the day, really bled them, and at this point think that one last charge. But instead of 36 battalions able to make the charge, he only has 8 battalions left. He has used the rest, the other 26, to hold his flanks against the Prussians. This is how the movie is going to portray that last charge. Whoops. Those explosions are very cinematic. I have no idea what they are supposed to be. There's no weapon in the Napoleonic Wars that would explode like that. Eight battalions of the Guard, each one led by a general officer, going to march forward.
Mistake in my life, I should have burnt Berlin.
Raise high the black flags, children. No pity. No prisoners. I'll shoot any man I see with pity in him. Forward!
Yeah, that song they were just playing sounds awfully familiar. Okay, so let me talk about some of the problems of this part. Of course, the Prussians are not in the woods, they're in Plensenois. That song they were playing that we probably know as Deutschland über alles is actually, at this time, an Austrian song called God Save Emperor Franz. So it hasn't been adopted, the words have not been the Deutschland über alles, so it would have been an Austrian song, which the Prussians would not have been playing. They're all wearing black uniforms where they would be wearing blue, Prussian blue, for example. But the Imperial Guard attack will fail. They're going to get to the crest of the hill. Wellington will have some of the guards stand up, fire into the face of it, and then attack with bayonet. The middle guard will actually start to retreat back. And this is going to start the disintegration of the army. Now, a couple of the famous incidents or vignettes. This one did really happen. That's Wellington as cavalry commander.
I've lost my leg. My God, sir. So you have.
Get forward of him!
So that's Lord Ponsonby, the cavalry commander. Near the end of the battle, artillery shell goes off. A piece of the casing breaks off and shatters his leg. And being British gentlemen, they look down and said, "My God, sir, I've lost my leg." And Wellington just looks down. "By God, sir, you have," which has enough witnesses in there. By the end of the day, Wellington, when you look at the battle and the crisis of the battle, and what a commander is going to do, Wellington has been pretty much wherever there has been a crisis during the battle. Almost all of his staff has been wounded or killed. He's running out of aides to carry messages. He has to actually ask some civilian volunteers who are there trying to be noticed if they would be so kind to carry a message for him. But he goes through the entire battle without a scratch. This last scene, as the Imperial Guard retreats back, they form squares. The 3 battalions of the Old Guard form square. This is how they portray it.
Frenchman, you have done all that the honor of war requires. His Grace the Duke of Wellington invites you to save your lives. Will you agree to surrender?
Okay, so let's recount real quick the scene, and then we'll talk a little bit about the history. So the old guard is asked to surrender. The first time, supposedly, Chambron is going to say, he's a colonel of the guard, he's going to say, the old guard dies but never surrenders. He's asked a second time, and he's going to say merde, the French for crap. Only the more juicy version of that. Only a couple problems with this scene. First off, the old guard surrenders. Chambron, for his entire life, will say, I didn't say these two things. But if you go in French and say the mot de Chambron, the word of Chambron, they'll still say it's merde. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the movie versus the history. So this is the Wounded Eagle Monument put up in 1904 at La Belle Alliance. It commemorates the last battle of the Grande Armée. It's actually an eagle. You can see there's some holes in its wing. It has a huge chest wound in it. The French army, the Army Nord, will disintegrate, the one that is being pursued here at Waterloo. There will be a victory by Grouchy 2 days later at Wavre. It's the last victory of the Napoleonic Wars for the French. But Napoleon will soon abdicate. He will go to the west coast of France. Thinks about for a time coming to America. His brother Joseph is trying to convince him to come. Joseph will come to Bordentown, New Jersey, and spend a good long period there. For those who've been stationed at Fort Drum, New York, part of the maneuver area and impact area actually used to be Bonaparte land owned by Joseph Bonaparte. And so it ends, this day ends the Grande Armée. So let's talk a little bit, just going down. So the timeline of events for the day in the campaign are relatively correct. You can argue that they leave out some things like the household cavalry charge that takes place at the same time as the Union Brigade. Plus, it doesn't show any other cavalry except the Scots Greys, but relatively good. The tactics of the period, not bad. They do an incredible amount of work to have the soldiers of the Russian army actually learn and be able to be commanded and moved around properly. Bombs bursting in air and all those explosions, I have no idea where those come from. Artillery of the day just doesn't work like that. There are rockets at Waterloo. The Duke of Wellington does not like rockets. The rocket troop actually fires rockets. During the Battle of Quatre Bras, one of the rockets hits the ground, turns around and comes back towards the cavalry, scattering the horses. So he's not a big fan of the rockets. There's really no mention of Dutch, Belgian, or the King's German Legion. Green uniforms, any white uniforms, anything other than the red coats. But you got to give it a plus for the extras. The amount of just being able to see at times a quarter of one of those armies actually marching in the campaign and filming is incredible. The compression events, which I already talked about, those 4 days get compressed into really a 36-hour period. That sunken landing of Victor Hugo, it's just hard to watch that scene with the horses falling over the top, and why he thought it was a 15-foot ditch. The Prussian role, this is one of the pieces. The Duke of Wellington at the time kind of plays a large portion of this. We can talk about the Cyborg model. About a third of the forces in the victory are Prussian, and yet it gets memorized as this British victory and British saving Europe. And then the fighting near Plancenoit, not even mentioned, not even shown in there. Looking at all those things, really only one thing I could do, also say the death of the guard is okay. But looking over this, comparing to the history, I have to rate the movie as an A+++++. Where else could you get a movie on this scale, an epic piece for the Napoleonic Wars? If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend going to watch it. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Mark, you want to do maybe 2 or 3 questions if anybody has some? We have microphones down here at the end. I'll start with this. It seems like in my lifetime, even the perception of Waterloo has shifted from British victory over the French to British had nothing to do with it. I assume the truth is somewhere in between. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I mentioned about the Cyborg model. William Cyborg is captain of the British Army. he sends out questionnaires to all the serving British officers who were at Waterloo and a lot of the auxiliary troops, and he gets about 700 back. And he then creates this model. It's a huge model with little figures, and they have 70,000 figures. And what he has determined is the crisis, the highlight, the moment of the day. And it's about 7 o'clock at night as the Imperial Guard does it. And he goes in a lot of debt creating this huge diorama with all these figures. And he expects he's going to recoup it by having people pay. See it is Wellington. And the problem is there's only a few British redcoats. There's a huge thing of these dark blue Prussians. There's all these green, there's all these white, and Wellington hates it and makes bad comments about it, and Syborn does not recoup his cost, goes into huge debt in there. And he really kind of goes to this British idea. Andrew Roberts wrote a book a couple years ago for the anniversary, or the bicentennial of the battle, that it's a short history in the front of the battle, and then it goes into how the British commemorate it, how the French commemorate it, and how the Germans, the Prussians commemorate it. It's really fascinating because for Britain, it's this huge piece, we save Europe. For the French, it's the almost, could have been, it's we almost do it. And the Germans are like, we don't care, it's Leipzig in 1813. That's the important thing for this reunification of Germany. So even though they play a key role in the victory, they minimize it because it's not as part of their national mythology of this unification of the Germans, the thing that's important to them. So hopefully that answered the question.
Hi, could you talk about maybe the reception of the film and the rumor that Stanley Kubrick's planned Napoleon epic was canceled because of this movie's failure?
Yeah, the reception of this film is kind of interesting. First off, if you're not familiar, Stanley Kubrick had wanted to create this movie Napoleon. And the rumor has always been the mythology that this film does poorly worldwide, and so therefore they canceled Napoleon. The only problem is Stanley Kubrick has canceled that movie 4 months before this starts shooting. So his cancellation of this has nothing to do with the reception of this movie. Now, to go particularly in this reception of the movie, it opens up in October of 1970 in London. It's attended by the Queen and Prince Philip. They had this big banquet. They show the movie, and the Queen stands up, standing ovation. The British audiences love it. It will do a huge multi-year run in Britain and make a lot of money. The next night, they go to Paris for the Paris opening. Doesn't have quite the same reception. The French newspapers are absolutely just rip it apart about an Italian making a movie with a Russian director, and being financed, and why don't you throw in a couple of Americans there? It's just like, this is terrible. And so it doesn't do very well in France. It doesn't make its money back in America. America, that time period, we could just do an entire series on the war movies in the history that come out in 1970, because this is the movie of Tora, Tora, Tora. It's the time period of Patton. Let's see, when they were filming in '68, they were filming The Bridge of Remagens, which I guess came out a year beforehand. There's just all these big epic movies, and Waterloo just doesn't fit in that time period. It's too accurate, it's too close to the events, and so it doesn't have a big social commentary that at the time, with the middle of the Vietnam War, really American audiences want. So, thank you.
All right. Anybody else?
You guys let me off easy if this is it.
I guess you did such a great job. Everybody had all the questions answered. Thank you, Mark. As usual, that was fantastic. One more.
I'm a real stickler for historical accuracy in films, but particularly those involving wars and large amounts of death. And when I think about those kinds of movies, I'm using an example of The Longest Day and A Bridge Too Far. So I wondered if you could compare and contrast the relative accuracy of this film with the relative accuracy of those two films?
Yeah, this is an off-the-cuff type of thing because both of them are great movies. The biggest problem with The Longest Day is they get too many big names. I love John Wayne. John Wayne is not like a 32-year-old airborne commander when he films that movie, and I think he's in his 50s at the time. A Bridge Too Far is pretty darn accurate, except the visually modified vehicles aren't that good. And I do want to talk a little bit more to kind of go to your question. I mean, the amount of effort. There was something like 59 or 54 factories in the Soviet Union and Italy that were working on uniforms. The biggest problem they have is they reuse a lot of the uniforms from Bondarchuk's War and Peace. So the uniforms of the French are actually the 1812 version, and they actually have changed the uniforms by 1815. So they're a little out of date. Things like the pom-poms and the plumes had gone off the uniform. But they actually have Italian weapons manufacturers who make both the Charleville and the Brown Bess muskets for the different scenes. So the soldiers who are near the camera, if they're British, are actually carrying the right type of firearm, a Brown Bess. And if you're French near the front, you're carrying a Charleville. As you get farther back, there's some fake rubber weapons. And if you get really, really far back, a lot of the Soviet infantry are carrying their Mosin-Nagant rifle, their actual service weapon that the Russian army is still using. But the uniforms, the British uniforms, are relatively accurate. And so they put a lot of effort. And just like the little scene we talked about crossing the Sambre, the tactics of it, how it would feel, how it would look, to me, that's really what makes the movie strong. Acting, maybe not the best. There's a scene in the middle of the film that Bondarchuk, he's trying to show this catastrophic battle and the natural forces, and he shows like a hurricane. And what he has done is has these Yak aircraft from World War II with no wings. They're moored to the ground, and he has their engines running to blow stuff. And if you watch the movie, there's scenes with Wellington, Christopher Plummer, and Rod Steiger, and there's stuff falling over there, and they're yelling over the top of these aircraft engines. Makes no sense. I think watching the movie now, 50 years later, it doesn't hold up that well. But there's a lot of it that it does do very, very well. And I would say of the two movies, The Bridge Too Far versus The Longest Day, The Bridge Too Far is the more historically accurate for the timeline of what happens than The Longest Day. But it's hard to take a book like Cornelius Ryan's, I think there are 1,000 pages books which he weaves together and then make a 2.5, 3 hour movie out of it that makes any sort of sense. So it's a huge project to begin with. So hopefully that answers that question.